Thank you, Speaker. Sponsor, who changed the merchant codes?
Representative Grills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This back in 2022, the ISO sent a letter to the several of the banks and asking them to adopt these merchant codes.
Representative Pearson.
And from your understanding, all banks adopted these merchant codes?
Representative Grills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No.
Representative Pearson.
How many banks currently operating within the state of Tennessee adopted the merchant codes that you're seeking to revert back to the ISO?
Representative Grills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. None.
Representative Pearson.
Can you clarify that?
Representative Grills.
Zero.
Representative Pearson.
So 0 banks have changed the merchant codes as it related to the ISO in the state of Tennessee. Am I understanding you right?
Representative Grills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, you are understanding me correctly. The Attorney General, Jonathan Skrmetti, back in 22, I believe it was September of 22, sent a letter encouraging, concerned about this. He took 27 other attorney generals, and those states that signed that letter they have not enforced those codes, or they're not using those codes in those states because of the preemption of the attorney general. And that's the reason that we do not see those codes here in Tennessee.
Representative Pearson.
Okay. One, let's give the Attorney General as much respect and power that they're due, but the legislature passes laws, and we preempt local governments and businesses all the time. A letter from the Attorney General isn't preemption. Preemption is an act done by the legislative body. Here's my challenge, sponsor. If nobody is doing this in our state, the letter worked. So why are you seeking to pass this legislation if no banks in our state have done this in now about 2.5 years?
Representative Grills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Because on March the 27th, 43 members of Congress sent a letter to the Treasury Department to basically encourage the Treasury to enforce the code on firearm retailers through the financial institutions. We have activists out there that are pushing this. That's the reason we are trying to get ahead of the game here in Tennessee. Once again, Tennessee will be leading the nation.
Representative Pearson.
Yeah. I think, look, there are no banks that are going to be impacted by this legislation. There are no businesses that are going to be impacted by this legislation, and yet we're seeking to bring forward legislation that is supposed to be strengthening people's access to the Second Amendment. In this legislation, you're right that if this were implemented, it may frustrate the right to keep and bear arms and violate the reasonable privacy rights of lawful purchasers of firearms and ammunition and all these other things. Look, if you're saying it is not currently a problem and it hasn't been a problem for years, and that there are some Congress people, I wonder how many of the 11 we have were part of that 43, this is really wasteful of time, energy, and resources if you're saying right now it is addressing a problem that actually isn't a problem. And I understand wanting to now have legislation that preempts people. Y'all do that a lot. But I do believe that this, again, it is not seeking to address a real problem. No bank would be impacted in our state by this legislation. No individual who wants to purchase a firearm is going to be impacted by this legislation. And there are so many things that we ought to be doing that could be impacting communities that we care about and the folks around our state. And so to have legislation that you've admitted isn't going to impact anything or anybody, and is only a response to a letter that was sent to the Department of the Treasury, just is absurd to me and is wasteful of our time, our energy, our intellect, and our resources. And I have to tell you, if the Department of Treasury was to enforce this, do you really think banks would be listening to the state of Tennessee over the federal government, which actually is responsible for ensuring their solvency, which they're insured by with the FDIC? Like, this makes no sense. This is wasteful of our time, and we really need to be dedicating our resources in other places. But if the federal government was to implement this, states all across this country would have to fall in line with the federal rules, and all of the banks in those states as well. And so that's why I can't support this legislation, although I supported your last one.
Representative Grills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And since the banks in Tennessee are not doing this, there will be no problem for them to conform to when this law goes into effect. And with that, I renew my motion. Thank you.
Representative Moon.
Thank you,